Hi everyone, this is Mauricio Lastras and I'm back again with another sim racing product review. Today I'm reviewing the Fanatec CSL wheelbase and the Fanatec CSL steering wheel P1. To start off the review, I want to talk about my last video, which I have a link right here for, about the Fanatec CSL Elite pedals, the load cell pedals. And since then, I've continued putting more time on them, and how happy I've been with them. It really has completely changed my experience, and that's just one component, and probably one of the best $200 I've ever spent. It's definitely turned into a big change in the experience for me. And one thing that I mentioned in that video was the pedal throw, and how I was discussing how the throttle pedal might need to be a little bit shorter, because I'm used to a very short throttle throw from the race cars that I've driven in the past. But it really depends, and there really are cars that have very, very long throws. So I came across this video of the Aston Martin GTE Vantage, and as you can see, it has a very long pedal throw on the throttle. So I'm comfortable with that, and I've gotten used to it. So I'm driving on the CSL Elites just as they come stock, and I'm very happy with how they perform. So one thing led to another, and after getting the pedals, I decided to, well, why not, let's try to upgrade the steering wheel as well. And I kind of didn't know what to expect. The community seems to think that steering wheels don't really translate to any added speed, although they might increase your feel and maybe immersion, but not necessarily make you faster. I definitely wanted to put that to a test. My previous video was very analytical, and so will today's be. So let's discuss the hardware first. So this is the CSL Elite wheelbase. As you can see, it shows to be another evolution in design. Compared to their more expensive cousin, you can see that this has a much cleaner faceplate. The other one had the bolt heads popping out of the front, and it wasn't anything out of the ordinary. I think it just was an additional challenge that maybe would have overridden the function of the design. So they left them open, but I think that they definitely came back with the design of this model and tried to clean that up. If you can clean it up, I think, and not show any bolts like that, I think it's usually a thing that you should do as an engineer. So I appreciate the design of it. It's a little bit cleaner, it's a little bit simpler. All the connections are in the back here, and they're very clean. There's no pinch points for the wires, and you can hook up your pedals and a couple different shifters, a handbrake if you have one, and connect it straight to a computer. Disconnecting it is very easy. And the clamp is very well designed as well. Definitely generates enough clamping force. I'm using the clamp, and I'm clamping it to my desk. I don't have a rig, and I'm happy with the way that that's working. Right now I have also a spacer put in between them, because my desk's thickness is very small, and the minimum thickness for this appears to be maybe 3/4 of an inch. So I'm using a little bit more material, or maybe half an inch, because I don't actually have the clamp all the way closed. So I'm using a little bit of material to close that distance. Maybe you need about a half-inch thick desk, but I have glass, and but it's working out for me just fine. So it's a clean design on the wheelbase. It has a drive system that's generated by a belt, and it gives very smooth motion. And in general, it's a very good-looking, very small, sleek unit. So I'm pretty happy with the design of it. So this is the CSL Elite steering wheel P1. The interesting thing about the CSL Elite P1 is that it's designed for Xbox and PC. So let's talk about the pros and the cons. The pro, the diameter of the wheel. It's nice, large, very realistic. I'm very happy with the size of the wheel. The material is rubber. Some people don't think that that's a very nice material because it's not expensive or anything like that. One thing I do like about the rubber is that it's a little bit tougher, and it'll stand up to sweat a lot better than maybe some other materials that are more like suede, that are going to get destroyed by the sweat from your hands over time. A lot of people use gloves. I don't like to use gloves when I'm sim racing. I have in the past when I was a kid and I was growing up, but it was just because of trying to be more realistic. But I don't use them. I've tested this week, and I ran a couple 45-minute races in MX-5, and my hands get a little bit sweaty, but it's still fine. Like it didn't really bother me. And then the rubber's solid; it's not going to absorb any sweat or anything like that. So I think that this rubber grip is going to stay together for a long time, and exactly how you see it, in good shape. The con, which I don't like, is the button arrangement on the steering wheel. You'll notice that the buttons aren't arranged in a symmetric way, and that kind of leads to an odd mapping of the buttons, I think. Basically, I like to have my look left and look right on either side of the steering wheel. I like to have my buttons mapped in a certain way, which I've grown used to. And I can't do it this way. I know maybe it's not a big deal to some, but to me it's just a little bit awkward, and I don't know where to put certain things because it just doesn't seem right. And I think that comes from the fact that it's a compromise between having to design the steering wheel for the Xbox and the PC. Like, clearly this isn't designed for just iRacers, and that's the issue. Obviously, if I had my way, I would put this button arrangement on the right side as well, and then these 3 buttons on the left side as well, and then I would have it just be perfectly symmetric, and then I would be happy with those buttons. But then the Xbox guys would probably be having an issue with that. So it's a compromise. It's not ideal, but that's the only thing. The feel of the buttons is fine. They feel exactly like regular gamepad buttons. Let's talk about the back of the steering wheel. The paddle shifters, they're working pretty good. I've never missed a shift with them. I'm happy. Some people have talked about the click and it not being a very loud or a feel click. And that's true. Like, I don't feel much, and I hear a little bit of a click, but it's not that obvious. But A, it doesn't take a lot of force to do the shift. But the most important thing is that they do come in, and I haven't missed any shifts or had any problems with it mechanically. So that's the most important thing. I think the paddle shifters are working just fine. The release from the steering wheel is economic release. This isn't like a quick release on the rest of the Fanatec steering wheel series list. But yeah, so you have to use a bolt to actually bolt it down and secure it to the wheelbase. But that's fine, and generally it's okay. I mean, clearly it's to try to lower the cost of the unit. So in general, I'm happy with the size of the steering wheel, and I'm happy with the shifters, the shifting paddles, but the buttons, I feel like, they're not ideal, and they cause me like a little bit of frustration when it comes to mapping them and setting things up, but eventually I'll probably get used to it. So let's talk about the experiment that I designed. So today, the way that we're going to test this steering wheel is I'm going to be comparing it to my Logitech G27, and I thought that it was going to be very important because of the fact that we're talking about comparing steering wheels. The analysis on Motec is not going to be as useful as the analysis was for the brake pedal. So I'm going to take my personal experience, and I'm going to do some testing at Sonoma Raceway with it, which is a track that I've had many laps around. And I'm going to be driving 3 different cars where they're similar in style to the cars I've driven around Sonoma. And I'm going to compare my personal experience on the racetrack to what I'm feeling with both steering wheels. And then we're going to do some analysis on top of that. The cars I chose to test are the Mazda MX-5 Cup car, which is similar to the Spec Miata I've driven at Sonoma Raceway. Then I also tested the Kia Optima, which is a front-wheel drive sedan, similar to a Mitsubishi Lancer, which I've driven, which is 4-wheel drive, but it has that key front-wheel drive feel that I'm looking for. So that would be a good analogous test, and the similar weight. And then the last car is the Formula Renault 2.0, which is the closest car to a Formula Enterprise, which I've raced around Sonoma Raceway as well. Now I want to show you this footage of me driving 2 different cars at Sonoma, and I want to show a couple cute little things that basically we're going to be looking for on the simulator with the 2 steering wheels. So if you look here, you see me, I'm driving the Spec Miata, and we're going down the front straightaway at Sonoma Raceway. As you see, we're going up to turn 1, and look at the hands on the steering wheel. Look at the hands, those big bumps we're going to be looking for because they're very characteristic at Sonoma Raceway, and it's very important to see that type of reaction. Same thing in the carousel. This is the carousel turn at Sonoma, and watch the hands as we come to the end of the carousel, and they're fighting the steering wheel through a couple of bumps. Now the Spec Miata has power steering, so not as much is transmitted through the steering wheel. Here we see me driving a Formula Enterprise, which has no power steering, and you'll see a little bit more transmitted through my hands, and I'm having to put a little bit more torque and a little bit more work to keep the car going in the trajectory which I want it to do. Here I'll also show you going through turn 3 and 4, and you can see that there's a little bit more information that's passed to the steering wheel, but not as much as maybe some would expect. Going through turn 5, we're going to see some bumps, and now we're going to be heading to that carousel turn again. And it's interesting to see how much the steering wheel movement changes between a car that has power steering and one that doesn't. And we're going to put that to the test with the steering wheels today. Going through the carousel, again, a lot of bumps. You see a little bit more hand movement with the Formula Enterprise. So that's going to be the analytical part of the test today, and afterwards we're going to go over it to Motec and we're going to look at the results, and then we're going to also do some performance force feedback tests from an app that I downloaded from a member of the community. So let's take a look at what happened. Okay, so we're ready now to head out onto the racetrack. As you can see, I have my Fanatec wheel rim and wheel base mounted directly to my desk. I use the clamp at the bottom, which works really well, it seems. I got it tight enough, certainly, as far as I need it to be, and I think it's a pretty solid. This is not going anywhere, and I think I can trust it to be able to race pretty hard and with the force feedback and not have any issues. So we'll head out. We're gonna do some laps. So we're gonna go into the settings, and again, linear mode off. I think I'm gonna set it to about strength 8 is what I found is pretty equivalent or realistic of a feel, and 0% on the brakes, damping 0, minimum force 0, and we're ready to go. Okay, so we're starting the lap, and I'm going to talk you through everything that I feel through the steering wheel. So going up to turn 1 at Sonoma, a lot of bumps through here, and yeah, you can hear it. I can definitely feel the bumps up to turn 2. They're quite, it's like almost like being in a boat and going through some waves as you go up there, and I felt it pretty well. Here I feel, it's hard to talk actually while driving at full speed, but a lot of bumpiness through the racetrack. Here, the carousel, another location we're gonna feel a couple of dips, especially right around here, and then again I feel the steering wheel get light and kind of be suspended there for a moment, which feels pretty good to me. Got some bumps there onto the braking zone. As I accelerate, I can feel the car. Here we go. Boom. I hit the curbs. I felt that. I feel the curb. You can hear it also. A little bit of a feel on the rumble strip there on the entry into turn 10. Not too bad. Also, because I have the car a little bit extra loose, sometimes I do feel the car get light on the exit of the carousel. That's one of the places where it's kind of obvious that I have a little less aero downforce. Right there, the car got loose on the entry there under braking. And then again, loose on the exit. When the car gets loose on me, I feel the steering wheel get really light. Let's go over the grass a couple times. Another interesting thing is that the damping, the force feedback damping works quite well on the CSL model here, because one classic thing that we know happens with force feedback loops is that when you let go of the steering wheel, they start an uncontrollable oscillation. And as you can see, I can even kick it. It actually kind of wants to recover. And it recovers every time. The steering is quite heavy. How heavy is it compared to real life? Well, obviously I haven't driven the exact Formula Renault 2.0, but having driven something comparable to it, to me it feels pretty good. I mean, I don't think that the real car was any more difficult to turn than this. I don't think it required more torque. I do remember after a day of driving that car, yeah, I mean, you'd be pretty spent, but more than anything, you'd have your back would probably be sore and your neck would be sore, not necessarily your arms or shoulders. After completing the laps, we come into the mode tech to look at the data that we retrieved. I looked over the data for all the cars, and most of it seems to be very consistent. So we're just going to show the data that was taken from the Formula Renault 2.0, and there are 3 different laps here. The primary lap is going to be the Fanatec CSL with force feedback on. In this plot and in the other ones, the blue trace is going to be from the G27, and the purple is going to be from the Fanatec CSL with the force feedback turned off. There's a couple of things that I noticed that are actually useful to look at. Basically, we're mainly going to be looking at the steering wheel angle, because that's actually a measure of the output or what's actually happening with my hands. The steering wheel torque, which is shown in the upper left, that is more of the signal that's actually being sent to the force feedback. So whether or not the force feedback is on or anything, it's all exactly the same, and no matter what the steering wheel is, it's all exactly the same. So that's just that particular run. Well, what was the signal being sent to the steering wheel? And there's one sort of useful plot that I made, which was the steering wheel rate, which is the rate of change of my steering angle. And that right now is being shown in radians per second. So the first thing that I wanted to look at, which was the run up to turn 2 and a little bit of turn 2. And we can see here that it seems that the green line, which is the Fanatec CSL force feedback turned on, seems to be a little bit jumpier than the blue. And the purple, which is force feedback turned off, is a little bit wavy, but that one is not as much as the others. And this is where the rate comes in, and you can see that here the CSL is being shown in red on the lower right. And you can see that the magnitude of the rate is much higher than all the other ones. So you can see that there's a lot going on here. And then we can look at the actual torque that's being input to the force feedback, and you can see what looks to be a few bumps on the track that are sending signal to a force feedback, but the CSL seems to be reacting to them a little bit more, or to at least a greater magnitude, which is actually moving the steering wheel in my hands. Then we go through to turn 2, and you can see the steering angle for the no force feedback is very smooth and very flat, kind of what you would expect. We run across, we can see that there's still a lot of bumps and a lot of waviness all the way through to turn, let's turn 2, 3, 4. So through turn 4 you can see how flat the no force feedback is, while the others, the G27 and the CSL with force feedback, you see a lot of oscillating back and forth with the steering. Let's go ahead and take a look at the carousel. So if you notice through the carousel, without force feedback, I can hold a very steady steering angle, and it's very smooth. And with the force feedback, it's a little bit of a different story. You can see left and right, left and right, left and right, little adjustments. Here, this is the part towards the second half of the carousel. There's a lot of bumps there, or at least a couple of really big bumps. And that's being shown in the torque that's being transmitted through the steering. And you can see that, again, seems like the CSL seems to react with a little bit more strength. And mind you that I did lower the force feedback strength is not the same for both of them. I set it to what felt to be about equivalent strength to me. And that was several clicks lower for the CSL than it was for the G27. So that looks pretty interesting. And then a couple other places. Let's look at the backstretch. There's a couple big bumps here, and not too bad. There I'm having to hold the steering wheel very tight to keep it smooth. That's very good. And here down the back straightaway where it's equal bumping, very flat set of bumps, we can see that for the most part the three steering wheels are doing about the same. Let's go ahead and finish out the lap. Same thing on the way down to turn 11, very flat, not very many bumps there. And that's the end of the lap. As you can see, it seems that the CSL has a little bit more strength to it, even though I did set it considerably lower, and it seems to be moving the steering wheel in my hands a little bit more. That's showing a little bit more detail in the bumps and stuff like that, which just adds a little bit to the realism of the driving. But still, there's a lot of good contrast in the force feedback, and I can feel when the car is going to get loose, the steering gets considerably light. Okay, so the other thing that I did to compare the two steering wheels was to run wheel check, which is a bit of software that was written by one of the members of the community. So I picked this up from the forum, and it's called wheel check. And here it automatically finds the steering wheel that you're using, and then it has different settings and different tests that you can do. And one important one that is outlined by the author is the linear force test. So you just go ahead and run it, and it goes and cycles through these motions where it's going to be given a force command, and it logs the data of the position of the steering wheel and the initial and post position, and then it measures the change in X. And here we see the results of the linearity test that was performed by the WheelCheck app. In blue, you'll see the results from the G27 test, and in orange, you'll see the results from the CSL Elite. As you can see, the CSL Elite is a lot more linear, it seems, than the G27. Although the G27 is also very linear in its response between its force and the displacement. Now we see here we see the results of the linearity test. This was the test performed by the WheelCheck app, and its output to now we take a look at the results of the WheelCheck app. This is a linearity test, and in blue you see the results for the G27, and in orange you see the results for the CSL Elite. As you can see, the orange plot is a little bit more linear than the results for the G27, especially in its initial displacement. The other thing that you'll notice towards the zero force, that the G27 has a large dead spot or a dead zone, where it doesn't actually start displacing the steering wheel until about the fourth or the fifth data point. All the other points below that result in zero displacement for the force that was given. This is where it's suggested that one uses the minimum force slider that's available in iRacing. But as you can see, that after the first data point for the CSL Elite, that immediately the steering wheel starts to displace. There are no zero values beyond zero force. And you can see that there's a change in slope for the first three data points, and then after that there's a almost constant slope between the third and 20 something points after that. So that looks a lot more encouraging, I think. I think the response of the motor driver and the encoder is they're working well together, and the encoder is working well. You can see that towards the higher end of the force range, that the G27 starts to lose a little bit of control, it seems. There's a couple of data points there that are just outliers, and it could just be because my G27 is a little bit older, but it honestly is not that old, and seeing that is a little bit of a surprise. That's towards the upper end of the force range, and that's definitely not something that you want to be seeing. So this plot shows that the CSL Elite is working very well. Finally, I wanted to take a look at the last test that I ran, which was with the Wheel Check app, which basically gives us a good measure of latency in the steering wheel. So basically the test is that, as you can see, this is a force that's being applied, which is being shown in the dark blue and dark red. And basically the timer starts logging time in milliseconds, and then it instantaneously puts or calls for a force of minus 1,000, it holds, then positive 1,000, holds, then negative 1,000, holds, and then 0. And then we plot the position of the encoder on the steering wheel to see how quickly it reacts and where it goes. So a couple of things that you'll notice is the G27 for some reason has a very, very notchy response. There's no change in the settings for the Wheel Check app. I just ran it both, exactly as it was in default. So that's kind of curious as to why the samples seem to be so notchy. But in any case, that's the yellow line, and then the CSL is shown in green. And you can see that, well, for the first bit, the first time that the force is given, the force command is given to the steering wheel, it seems that there's some inertia or something that has to overcome. The author of the app does mention that some of these tests are a little bit limited or flawed in some ways, one of which would be that all wheels don't weigh the same and all wheels don't have the same amount of inertia. Obviously, the CSL with the larger rim automatically is going to have a larger moment of inertia to overcome, and the weight could be different. I mean, there's any number of causes, and it might not even be a case of overcoming inertia, but it seems like the reaction is a little bit slower with the CSL for the first command, but then when it switches and goes the other direction, it seems like both steering wheels reacted about the same exact moment. You can see that you can plot a line right there. I don't know if we can do that. And same story for all the other instances where there's a change in the direction of the wheel. So as you can see, let's go ahead and make that white. You can see that the latency seems to be the same for the CSL and the G27 at that point. And about here as well, if anything, the CSL looks to have its inflection point just a little bit before the G27, and then both of them seem to want to flatten out around the same location here. So the results are kind of interesting, but it's so funny how the initial latency or response is so great for the CSL. This is a test which is actually kind of interesting because the results aren't exactly the same every single time that I run it. And this seems to be just more the typical results, but something to take into consideration, which is response latency. Alright, so that was a pretty interesting result. I think maybe that's going to come as a surprise to many. I did not show lap times, and I did not show the actual G27 being done, obviously for the sake of the length of the video and or the other cars. But I do have the lap times, and I do want to review them. But basically, the lap times were almost identical with the G27 and the CSL Elite. Basically, they were within a tenth of each other with all the cars that I drove. The true interesting fact was that force feedback off was much, much lower. That one turned out to be about half a second to a second off the pace, depending on which car. And the biggest problem was just the fact that you couldn't get into a corner and carry very much speed in it, especially with as loose as I had the Formula Renault set up. So then that really made it difficult to get a good clean lap in, and any lap that I did that was any clean had to be a little bit more conservative. So without force feedback, definitely a lot slower, which gives the importance of force feedback. I think the biggest job that force feedback does for you when it comes to pace is corner entry. And you can drive a car a lot looser if you have good force feedback, and it can give you that information that, hey, the car's about to get loose and you can correct it. That means that you can drive a looser race car. That means that you can go faster throughout the lap. If you don't have force feedback or very good force feedback, then you're not going to get that information, and ultimately you might not be able to handle a car that's as loose as some other drivers are. So let's go over the pros and cons of the two steering wheels, or the CSLs. Basically, the pro, I think, is definitely the design of the wheelbase and the fact that Fanatics, you can change the wheel rim out. I definitely think that I'm going to be buying also the Fanatic Formula rim, because A, it's a very beautiful rim. It's clean, it's elegant, a lot of people seem to own it, and it's so useful across so many cars. I also do love the BMW GT2 rim. I don't know if I'm going to get that one, because the truth is that now if you look around the GT race car paddock, most GT race cars now have the same Formula style rim today. You look across the Aston Martins and Corvettes and Bentley, and everybody's using small Formula style steering wheels. So it seems like the Fanatic Formula rim is really all you need, and maybe the CSL P1 rim whenever you want to drive an MX-5 or NASCAR or anything that has like a round rim. But between the two of them, I think you got it covered. The con, I would say, is definitely the button arrangement, which I don't particularly like. Again, it's a compromise, but it's still going to take me a while to get used to it and find a convenient mapping to the different things that I want to use. Mainly just the look right and look left. But if I'm driving any car that's a GT, like I am right now, because I don't have the Formula rim, then I want to map traction control and brake bias and engine fuel management stuff. And there's just not a really elegant or intuitive way of mapping the buttons to do that on the steering rim. So I don't really like that so much. But I'm excited to have both steering wheels and play around with that. The other thing that I want to talk about as far as the wheelbase goes, I think the pros are definitely how quiet it is. I think the belt drive is very smooth, and having tested compared to the G27, the G27 has a lot of backlash in its gears, and it leads to a lot of rumble, a lot of noise, a lot of false vibration, because really maybe the signal being sent to a steering wheel is for a single bump, a single torque moment, and then it kind of rocks between the gears a little bit, and then you end up with additional vibration that is not necessarily there, but it definitely has that rumble that everybody knows, and it's very loud. Some people have talked about the CSL wheelbase being loud, but the G27 is definitely much louder, and the strength of it, for the people that like high force feedback strength, this CSL Elite is much stronger. To give you a point, normally with the G27 I have my force feedback set between 9 and 12, and with the CSL Elite I have it set between 5 and 7. So just to have about the same amount of resistance to the G27, I don't like a lot of resistance, and most of the time I set it to what I know is realistic. So the amount of steering torque in the real Spec Miata or some of these race cars is not that high. The Mitsubishi Lancer had a lot of power steering in it. The steering was very light, so not a lot of torque in that. So that's why I set mine very low as well. And the strength of this is very, very high. I could set it as high as 15 or so, or 18 before I actually got any clipping, but I like the feel of it around 5 to 7 for most cars. The other pro that I want to talk about is just the belt drive. Again, it's just very smooth. The fan seems to work very well, and I think that it's usually always continuously running the fan to keep the motor cool, because I can feel the exhaust temperature of the air, and it's not very high, so it seems like the unit actually does not run hot, but that they run the fan regardless whenever the force feedback is running, just to keep it at a good operating temperature, which is, I think, is a smart decision. In general, it's very quiet, the fan is quiet, and I don't ever hear or notice them when I'm driving until I stop, just because I have the volume, I guess, on the car loud enough that it definitely masks the noise of the steering wheel. So my final thoughts on the Fanatec CSL wheelbase and the P1 rim are that you're definitely not going to get anything better for that amount of money. For anybody that's thinking about getting into sim racing, I definitely would go this route before maybe going to a G27, just because the pedal set is so much further ahead than the Logitech G27 pedals that on its own surpasses the value of the savings compared. Because yes, you will be spending a little bit more, but the $200 for the pedals is absolutely worth it. And this is a better rim, I think, shown by the analysis. I think it showed that the strength is higher. I think it showed that it has a little bit more detail, even though it's smoother and doesn't have the backlash. It actually gave more finer detail of the little things going on the racetrack. It gave better feel of just not having a dead zone and having a good feel of the car getting light and the torque getting light when the car gets loose. Maybe it didn't translate to necessarily being any faster yet, but again, I wanted to do the test very evenly, and maybe I have too much time on the G27 and there's no way for me to, I have years worth of experience on the G27 and I only have a few hours on this unit, so maybe that's not necessarily equivalent. But I wanted to do the best, so I only ran the same number of laps with the same cars for the test, between 5 to 7. But definitely, I like the way that it feels. It feels a little bit more realistic. It feels a little bit smoother. It feels a little bit more like that Spec Miata that I was driving that I showed earlier. So I think the G27, that backlash doesn't actually give me the same type of feel. It feels a little bit looser in its settings, and it has a degree of feel that like the force feedback isn't even on until it is. So it feels like it's absolutely free, and then it's on all of a sudden, and then it's free, and then it's all on all of a sudden. This one feels a little bit more consistent, but then it lightens up nicely whenever the car's getting loose. I think it's a great bang for your buck. The performance, I think, is fantastic, and I think definitely it would make anybody really enjoy sim racing, and definitely give you the type of performance that you need to be competitive out there. So until next time, this is Mauricio Lastres. I hope you enjoyed the video. Comment, ask questions, I always reply. And don't forget to subscribe, and if you have any suggestions or anything that you want to see in the future videos, let me know. Until next time.